we also exported a lot of raw agricultural products, right? We are not processing them, right? And so if you look at it, you're getting, when you export it raw, you didn't do any value add. You're getting less than 10% of the actual end value, right? So you need to focus on building more agro processing, right?
Recently, we have seen such a great number of foreigners, coming into the country, and they are establishing their businesses. So, is that helping the economy of the country? Or?
The challenge is, Africa more broadly, right? And some countries way better than others, right? And it kind of frustrates me when people say like Africa, like there's regions that things are way better, and even in like our region, like there's things that are working very well in Senegal that are not so much in Gambia, right? And I think they've succeeded in Senegal in attracting a lot of investors, right? And their success is in anyone can come in and set up a business, right? And we want to have as level playing field as we can in a fair and free market, right? In Gambia's case too, that can be very true. The challenge is, there was a UN report I read that said 85% of small to medium-sized businesses in the country are foreign owned, right? Now, it's good because it brings in capital. It's not good because then you go, well, what are the Gambians doing, right? If 85% of, let's say, small businesses are owned by non-Gambians, right? So it's this tricky thing where you need to figure out how to encourage Gambians, and particularly, I think, the diaspora, right? I don't think it's a stop the foreign investment or stop foreigners from coming in to invest. I think that's great. I think what you need to figure out is how do you also attract the diaspora to come and invest, right? I think that's a key differentiator that Gambia probably has over most countries, is we have such a large amount of Gambians in other countries, right? So you can't be like, well, people can't come in my country and invest, but you're in another country, right? As I was saying, almost 40% of GDP is remittances, right? Which is a tremendous amount of resources. It's over $1 billion, right? And so how do you attract the diaspora to come and invest? I think it's a balance of encourage more Gambians to invest, not a stop other people, non-Gambians, from investing, right? And I think if you can attract and facilitate, the diaspora to invest more, then I think it can work together, right? They are complementary. I don't think it's one or the other because we don't have the capital, right? So if you today said all these non-Gambians that are coming to Gambia can't invest, we need to limit that, who's going to invest, right? So you need to encourage the diaspora to invest, right? So that those two can complement each other, right? And so it's not that 85% of businesses are owned by non-Gambians, right? And so I think that's where there's a big opportunity for the government, is how do you facilitate that? Now, it's a bigger challenge than it sounds, because most Gambians I talk to have either come and left because it didn't work out for whatever reason. And some say, oh, I do have a business there. I have a shop, or I'm doing trading, and then you talk to them, the challenges they face, and they're like, well, the problem is someone stole my money. Like, I don't know what happened to my products, right? So you have those kinds of, so how can we as a nation, how can the government help facilitate that? But also there are a lot of entrepreneurs today that I know that are trying to create investment vehicles, right? So like diaspora bond, like a way for you to invest in a vehicle that invests in multiple different companies, right? So like those are the infrastructures we need to put in place for more diaspora investment.
So, okay, since we are talking about foreign investment, so what do you think, what kind of a foreign investment can stimulate growth in the country and should be more focused more than other kind of investments?
Yeah, so I think long-term investments, right? These roads to nowhere are very short term in nature. Like, it's great we have roads, and I mentioned that, but we need to focus on the longer term investments, right? Because those long term investments also solve other problems. Like we talked about the energy stuff, right? We also exported a lot of raw agricultural products, right? We don't not processing them, right? And so if you look at it, you're getting, when you export it raw, you didn't do any value add. You're getting less than 10% of the actual end value, right? So you need to focus on building more agro processing, right? I have a friend of mine who's in the cashew processing, right? So and I can see how many people he employs, but also he is earning foreign reserve for the currency because he can export it now, right? So we need to focus on those longer term investments. Again, this is private sector we're talking about, right? So how do you encourage more of that private sector to do it, not these sort of government led programs into abyss? You do like a 5-year study and you don't even know what they did. But how do we get those funds directly, those investments directly to the private sector and spur that private sector growth? And I think we need to sort of avoid also this foreign direct investment model a little bit. As I was saying, I think we need to complement the influx of capital that come with a lot of migration. We need to complement that with diaspora investment and local investment as well. But there's this also, I was talking to someone who works for one of the government agencies, and I was like, what is your selling point for people to want to invest here, right? And then he said, well, if you work with us and you get like a tax incentive and you don't have to pay taxes for 5 years, and then you can repatriate 100% of all your profits back to, wherever it is, country, right? And so I started thinking, well, how is that good, right? It's good that it brought the investment, but it's not good that all the profits then left, right? And so how do we encourage some of those dollars to stay? Obviously, from your home country, you want to bring back, and I think that's great. But how do you build in a mechanism that there's some reinvestment clause, like 15% of that money must be reinvested? So how do we avoid? How do we become creative about this model effectively that's in place today to ensure and to encourage reinvestment? But we need to focus on the longer term investments. I think we just need to stop building the roads to nowhere, but also focus on the private sector as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. And Mr. Jobe, like you were in the US, decided to come back in the Gambia and invest. So what were some of the major challenges you have seen, and do you think that should be, avoided?
Yeah, I think some of these things, I kid, I'm like, I think if they had a website that said, I want to invest in Gambia, here's the things you can do. I kid about that only because you're very much on your own, unless you have people, people that have done it before, right? Or very well connected people, right? And there are, I think, certain programs designed for this, like GIPA is the Gambia Import Export Promotion Schemes, that the intention there is to help guide people to come make investments in this country. But I think they need to go even further than they do today. Meaning some of the challenges I faced personally was just the basic things like the ease of doing business, right? We talked about like just registering a company, right? What permit you need, right? Like those things are very challenging. And I think the other challenges I face is this tax structure, right? I think for the country to attract even more people, we need to simplify our tax structure. Taxes are too high. I mean, people will say things like, well, it's 27% corporate tax and a minimum of 1 to 2% of turnover. But what they don't tell you is, well, you have to pay employee tax, you have to pay social security tax. It's true, you have to pay these things in most countries, right? However, we talked about how we import significantly more than we export. So if you have a plant, for instance, the likelihood is very high that you're importing raw materials of some sort, right? Then you get hit with import duties. Then you're hit with excise tax. You got to pay a VAT, right? So this, what seems like a not so high tax, is very high if you're actually playing by the books. And so one of the challenges I ran into is, I would go to one agency and say, oh, I'm here to pay, GRA, I'm here to pay my, corporate taxes, and then later on, someone's like, oh, did you pay your social security tax? I'm like, oh, I have to pay that? Okay. Then I have to go there, and then they go, oh, well, you haven't paid it in the last 6 months. Now you're going to be hit with this penalty. So it's just like that, like there isn't a great resource for coming in to do that. It's a very big challenge. But I think, for taxes generally, the vast majority of people in this country don't pay taxes, right? And it's like this known secret, like everyone knows it, right? And if you talk to a business owner and they go, well, I can't pay it because my next door neighbor doesn't pay it. If I pay it, I'm at a competitive disadvantage. Why should I pay it, right? But maybe they want to pay it, but it's too high. So we have an enforcement issue, right? And so people are paying different levels of tax throughout the country. So maybe we just need to lower the tax and then apply it across the board and enforce it, like simplify the process. Same thing with, I'm coming in, I want to register a business, where do I go, right? Or I want to hire people. Like that was another challenge for me. Like what's the resource? Where do I go to hire people, right? That was a big challenge, right? In some ways, it was much more, it was very costly for me, like the loss of time, the opportunity cost. And that's what people don't talk about a lot is we make it so difficult to operate a business here, not realizing the opportunity cost, what people gave up. For me, I gave up, I quit my job, my wife quit her job, we sold our house, we moved our daughter here, now we have to go to private school. The opportunity cost is very high. For you to come here, and also it's very difficult to just do the very basic things. And so those are some of the challenges I face were, just opening the business, to be honest with you, finding the right labor, making sure you're compliant. There isn't any great resource. You kind of have to go to you find things by accident, to be honest. It's just very not organized. But I think that's an opportunity space.
That's a sad reality.
Yeah. No, it's an opportunity space. And and I know many similar business owners here today who are struggling with that. They just need this one permit, or they just need this one thing, but then they get in a runaround. It takes like a year. It's very quite challenging. And also property rights. I think I mentioned that, like asset protection is very important, because unfortunately, just like not just Gambia but anywhere in the world, in the course of doing business, there's disputes. There's theft, right? And so the mechanism, the government needs to de-risk that for the investor. It's very difficult. Like here, you can go to court for like 3 years, right? Disputing property, like come adjourn, right? So those things are all very discouraging for investors. But at the same time, it's the opportunity to come make something, right? It's not too late for us to course correct. Like I said, I think we need to be careful with that. But if we're going to take that, let's put it in productive sectors of the economy, right? Let's promote private sector growth. Private individuals and entrepreneurs have a way better idea how to get a return on that money than the government does. So we need to focus on those things. And we need to take out these barriers to do business, and make sure we have a free and fair commerce, right? And in many cases, it's not. I'm finding that out too, like that it's not free and fair.
So, any last piece of advice for our listeners?
I think really we need to, one, especially relates to debt, there has to be transparency. So, like we don't want the situation of what happened in Senegal. There's a new government and they go, oh, there's way more debt than we thought, because there was no transparency, and there was also no transparency on the terms of those things. So, very simply, we need to have a situation where, the parliament reviews it and it's approved and things like that. We just need to have more transparency in debt and what we're doing with debt. Obviously, we need to be focused on, income producing, income generating, economic activity generating investments from the government level, not just building roads. We need to focus on that energy infrastructure. And then I think private sector growth is what we really need to focus on. How do you make it easier for the private sector to, thrive in this country? How do we take down those barriers? How do we simplify the tax structure? And how do you make it, and this is the main thing I want to say, how do you make it easier for the diaspora to come invest in Gambia? I think the government is very interested in a lot of other sources of income, but one that's staring us in the face. These are people that love Gambia. They have an affinity for the country. They grew up here or they have family here. You're almost guaranteed if they invest here and any return they get will be reinvested here. So a very good focus on the diaspora as investors is what we really need as a country, because otherwise we're just going to be in this vicious cycle of the devaluing of our currency. The Dalasi in 2016 was to the dollar was 42, today is 72, and part of that is because this debt has ballooned and we keep printing money to pay to debt service, but also because we're not industrializing, and so we need to encourage the diaspora to be more vocal and more involved in investment activity, and to do that we need to build the infrastructure for them to be able to do that.
No, thank you very much for joining us and having this instructive discussion on this very sensitive topic.
No. I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Very much honored to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, dear viewers, that's all for today. Until we come your way, till then, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Talking about in terms of health and fitness, I think the main point we should discuss, and I think a lot what people should do, is actually just getting started in their journey. A lot of people like to delay, saying, "Oh, I'm not fit enough to go to a gym," or "I'm not fit enough to join a run club," or "I'm not fit enough to start exercise." But we all start somewhere,